We're going to replace the hinge pins and bushings on the door of this C3 Corvette. Now if you look at the movement, you'll see this door has actually dropped quite a bit. There's a good 1/8 of an inch, maybe more, of movement in that. Now the hinge pins can actually be reached with the door on, and it's possible to drive them up and out. But the problem is that this top pin will catch on both the door and the bodywork. So the way around that is to actually take the door off the hinge. To take the door off its hinges, we're going to remove this trim panel, and then there are bolts up here and down here. Before we do any of that though, we want to support the door. So we've got the door panel off, and you'll notice we've also got the door supported on the jack stand trolley. So now we're going to remove this panel so we can access the upper hinge bolts. Now we'd really like to get these bolts back, or get the door back in the same position that it's coming out of. So with a Sharpie we're actually going to mark around the bolts, just so we can be sure we've got them back in the same position as where they came from. So with the bolt holes marked, we take a 9/16 socket and we start to loosen off the bolts. So we just ease off each one in turn. And we'll repeat down on the 4 holes right down here at the bottom of the lower hinge. So here we go, getting in on these. Got to get some light in there. And we'll keep going, and we'll take all 8 bolts out, and then we can pull the door back away from the hinge, which gives us room to work in here anyway. Just watching the electrical lead as that comes through from the body. Okay, so we've got all the bolts out. Now we're going to ease the door back off the hinges, trying to make sure that it's well stays supported and we don't drop it. So here goes. So now we've got some room here to get on these hinges. So now we've got the door out the way, we can actually see how much movement there is there in the hinge. And we're going to push this pin out from underneath with a little encouragement. So we'll tap it out. Okay, so you can see how we've dislodged the pin now. This is where it gets a little interesting, because we're still going to foul on the bodywork. So we actually have to get our Dremel and grind off some of the head of this pin. Okay, so we're just going to push it back a little more. Just put a punch underneath and we just tap it out. Now actually this pin came out without having to grind anything off. There was just enough clearance here. So now we can pull the old hinge off and remove the bushings. We can see here the bushings, which are actually surprisingly intact, but obviously pretty worn. So having cleaned all the 30 odd years of grime off here, we're ready to put the new bushings in. One from the top and one will go up underneath from the bottom, so that the flat surface is ready to take the wear. Now something to mention is that the head of the bolt, the pin, has to be ground down into a kind of a D shape so we can clear the bodywork just there. Without that, we end up fouling on the body and chipping the paint and everything. So now we've eased the hinge on with plenty of lube, so it's lined up over the bushings, and we'll take the pin and we'll put a little bit more lube on that and try and help it slide in. Situation like this, you probably can never have too much. And then we'll ease the pin in carefully, encouraging it down past the bodywork. And there we go, it's in past the first stage, and we'll get a punch and we'll just drive that down all the way. So now we've got the pin driven in on the top hinge, and that's working. Of course, we've actually cleaned up the rollers down there that work on the spring. We can turn our attention to this lower hinge down here, which you can see is also in a pretty poor state. So now we've driven the pin up and out, and we're ready to try and encourage this hinge off. You see that comes off pretty easily. And we're going to push the bushings out, and then we'll clean everything down, put new bushings back in. So we've put the bushings in, and as before, we're going to ease the hinge over. Goes over pretty easily actually. And then we'll take the new pin, we'll add a bit of oil to help it on its way, and we'll ease the pin in through the hinge. And there we go. And then this just needs driving down again with a hammer just to make sure it's properly seated all the way. So, here we are. We've just put the door back on its hinges, making sure to align it with the marks that we made in there. And make sure there's plenty of lube. And then all that play has gone completely. And the door shuts. And the nice thing is we can open it again.